You forgot where you put your keys again. You forgot the name of someone you met last week. You forgot the specific details of a conversation you had 3 days ago. And if someone asked you to recall every single thing that happened to you last Tuesday, you would fail almost immediately. You have been failing at memory your entire life. And that failure is one of the most sophisticated things your brain has ever done. The assumption most people carry about memory is that it works like a hard drive, that the goal is maximum storage, that forgetting represents a malfunction, a crack in the system, something to be fixed or compensated for. But this assumption is almost entirely wrong. Forgetting is not a bug, it is the feature. And understanding why will permanently change the way you think about your own mind. To understand why forgetting is valuable, you first have to understand what a memory actually costs. Every memory your brain encodes requires physical resources. New synaptic connections must be built and maintained. Neural pathways must be reinforced. The biological machinery of memory is expensive, and the brain, like any system operating under resource constraints, has to make constant decisions about what is worth keeping and what is worth releasing. Neuroscientist Tomás Ryan at Trinity College Dublin has argued that the default state of the brain is not memory. It is forgetting. The brain does not passively lose information over time. It actively suppresses information it has determined to be low value. This is not a passive process. It requires energy. It requires dedicated neural circuits. The brain works to forget in the same way it works to remember, because both are essential to function. Think about what your day would look like if your brain treated every piece of incoming information as equally worth preserving. The exact angle of light through your window at 7:14 this morning. The precise texture of the mug you held during your first coffee. The specific sequence of thoughts you had waiting for a traffic light to change. Your brain is bombarded with roughly 11 million bits of sensory information every single second. It consciously processes around 50 of them. The rest is filtered, compressed, or discarded before it ever reaches your awareness. That filtering is not a failure. It is the entire architecture of a functioning mind. Psychologist Robert Bjork at UCLA has spent decades studying what he calls the desirable difficulties of memory. His research shows that forgetting is not simply the absence of remembering. It is an active mechanism that makes subsequent learning more efficient. When you forget something and then relearn it, the memory that forms a second time is stronger, more deeply encoded, and more resistant to future loss than the original. Forgetting creates the conditions for better memory. The blank space left by a forgotten fact is not empty. It is primed. But the most striking evidence for the value of forgetting comes from the rare individuals who cannot do it. Hyperthymesia is a condition in which a person retains an involuntary, detailed autobiographical memory of nearly every day of their life. People with hyperthymesia can tell you what they were doing on any specific date, years in the past, with extraordinary precision. They can recall the weather, what they wore, what they ate, what they heard on the radio. Every day is perfectly preserved. And almost universally, they describe it as a burden. Researcher James McGaugh at the University of California, Irvine, studied the first formally documented case of hyperthymesia in detail, working with a woman known in early research as AJ, who described her memory as uncontrollable and exhausting. She could not choose what to remember. Every moment of her past was equally present, equally vivid, equally immediate. She described living as though watching two television screens simultaneously, one showing the present and one showing the past, with no way to turn either off. The problem is not the volume of information. The problem is the absence of hierarchy. A functional memory system does not treat all information as equally important. It weights experiences by their emotional significance, their novelty, their relevance to future decisions, and their connection to existing knowledge. The hierarchy that results from this weighting is what allows you to act quickly, decide efficiently, and move through the world without being paralyzed by the full record of everything that has ever happened to you. When you cannot forget, that hierarchy collapses. Everything becomes noise. There is also the psychological dimension. Forgetting is one of the primary mechanisms through which the human mind recovers from pain. Research by psychologist Michael Anderson at Cambridge University has identified what he calls the suppression mechanism. a process by which the brain actively inhibits unwanted memories. When you try not to think about something difficult, you're not simply distracting yourself. You are engaging a specific neural system centered in the prefrontal cortex that reduces the activation of the targeted memory over time. The more you practice not thinking about something, the less accessible it becomes. This is how people move through grief. It is how people recover from embarrassment, from failure, from loss. The brain's capacity to weaken painful memories is not a sign of weakness. It is a fundamental component of psychological resilience. Without this capacity, every past pain would remain at full intensity forever. Every mistake you ever made would be as vivid and as sharp as the moment it happened. Every argument, every humiliation, every regret would stack up without dimming. The people with hyperthymesia often describe exactly this experience. They cannot distance themselves from past pain the way most people naturally do, because the past never fades. It simply remains. And there is a deeper function that forgetting serves. It protects the generalization that makes intelligence possible. Your brain does not just store facts, it builds models. It abstracts patterns from individual experiences and uses those patterns to make predictions about situations it has never encountered before. This abstraction requires that specific details be released in favor of general principles. To know that dogs are generally safe requires that you forget the specific fur color and exact bark of every individual dog you have met. To navigate a new city requires that you apply general spatial reasoning rather than trying to match your surroundings against a detailed map of every street you have ever walked. If you remembered every specific detail of every experience with perfect fidelity, you would struggle to generalize across them. You would know your childhood dog perfectly and be unable to use that knowledge to understand any other dog. Memory researcher Lynn Nadell at the University of Arizona has studied the relationship between detailed episodic memory and general knowledge, and his work suggests that the very act of forgetting specific episodes is part of how the brain extracts lasting wisdom from experience. The individual memory must dissolve, at least in part, for the lesson it contains to become usable knowledge. This reframes forgetting entirely. It is not what happens when memory fails. It is what happens when memory succeeds at its deepest function. The goal of your memory system is not to produce a perfect archive of the past. It is to make you better at navigating the future. And a perfect archive of the past would actually make you worse at that task, not better. The past is raw material. Forgetting is the processing that turns raw material into something you can use. So the next time you cannot remember where you left your keys, or you blank on a name that should be obvious, or an entire week dissolves into a blur you cannot reconstruct, consider what else your brain was doing in those moments. It was filtering 11 million bits of incoming information per second. It was building and strengthening the patterns that allow you to move through the world with speed and confidence. It was quietly suppressing things that were weighing on you. It was turning yesterday's specific experiences into tomorrow's general wisdom. Your brain did not fail to remember those things. It decided they were not worth the cost of keeping. And most of the time, it was right. The mind that forgets efficiently is not a weak mind. It is a mind doing exactly what a mind is for. You have been forgetting all your life, and it is the reason you can think at all.